Before getting into today's stories, I want to thank Fume for sponsoring this video. Do you have a bad habit that you need to drop? Almost everybody's got at least one. Not every bad habit is wrong per se, but instead of going through with uncomfortable, stressful changes, why not just remove the bad from your habit? Fume has just the solution to that. They offer an innovative, award-winning flavored air device that doesn't use electronics or harmful chemicals. Instead, it just uses all-natural, delicious flavors. Fume makes replacing your bad habit really easy in an all-natural and guilt-free way. Base was launched in January. It's a weighted stand to rest your fume on when not in use, with a magnet inside that keeps your fume attached. The Fume device can be spun around on it, which is good for fidgeting. Crisp mint is my favorite flavor, and orange vanilla is a close second. Stopping a bad habit is something we all put off because it's hard, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 150,000 customers and has had thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that can't be you. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com/nightmare or scan the QR code and use code NIGHTMARE to get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. It was supposed to be one of, if not the last delivery of the night for me. I was working at this pizzeria called Leonardo's. One of my bosses, Frank, was on the night shift with me. He would choose who does what delivery. We got an order for a couple regular pizzas. He gave me a piece of paper with the address on it and the person's phone number. This was in 2009. I didn't have a cell phone that had GPS, just a bare-bones flip phone. I also didn't have one of those Garmin GPSs. I still had to use an old-school book of maps to find my way around when doing deliveries. The name of the street that this house I was doing my last delivery for was something along the lines of Willows Road. I can't remember the house number, nor do I remember the name given for the order, but I do remember having the hardest time finding the place. It was in this really rural town with nothing but woods, farmland, and more woods. The lack of streetlights also didn't help. I had to pull over a few times and turn on the interior lights as I checked the map again. It was a very stress-inducing situation whenever I couldn't find a house. I was on a very quiet, dark, and confusing road when I decided to just call the number on the paper my boss gave me. The phone rang a bunch of times. It seemed that there was no answering machine set up to it. It had to have rung about 10 times before someone picked up, and I waited for someone to say hello. When no one did, I said it, and then a voice on the other end said it back. It was a low, deep, yet soft voice. I said, "This is the pizza guy. I'm just having a hard time finding your place." He explained that his driveway was easy to miss and looks like just a dirt trail. He talked in a very slow, monotone voice as he described the surroundings of his driveway to help me find it, and eventually I did. I turned my car onto this pretty narrow dirt path. It was definitely easy to miss. It took about 30 seconds of me driving slowly and carefully up it until I saw this small, one-story house come into view. There was a faint orange glow from inside the house that could be seen through one of the windows. I parked my car next to the only other vehicle in sight, this jalopy of a pickup truck. I grabbed the 2 pizzas from the passenger seat and walked to the front door of the house. I looked for a doorbell, couldn't find one, so I knocked on the door. I heard muffled music from inside the house. Then I heard footsteps approaching the door, stop, and then after maybe 10 seconds, the door cracked open, and I saw a quarter of someone's face. I literally could just see one of their eyes peeking out at me. I nervously said, "Hey, you ordered the pizza, right?" The guy said, "Oh yes, the pizza." I recognized the voice from the phone call from before. There was a weird pause. I didn't know what to say, except for, "Do you have the cash?" He said, "Yes, let me go get it." He walked away from the door, and I heard his footsteps move to another room. There was super old music from like the 1930s playing, making the setting just extra creepy and weird, if it weren't creepy enough already. Then the door started slowly inching open on its own, revealing more and more of this dimly lit room. Everything about the interior of this place seemed super old. There were metal sheets on the floor, presumably covering holes in the floor. The couch looked like it was from a different century. Hell, all of the furniture did. And the music was coming from a vintage-looking record player, one of those with the big horn-like thing at top. That's all I could see at first from just sneaking a nosy peek inside the place. But what really was off-putting was the smell. It smelled like death in there. I waited respectfully for the guy to come back with the money, from wherever he went. When enough time passed that I felt like it was getting weird, I knocked on the open door, took a peek inside, and said, "Sir?" The man's voice came from another room, saying, "Yes, would you mind coming into the kitchen, please?" My coworkers and bosses always advised against stepping into anyone's house if you didn't have to. That advice seemed especially relevant for this circumstance. I heard what the man said, but I still responded, "Can you repeat that?" He repeated, "Can you come to the kitchen, please?" I stepped inside, and I honestly felt like my feet were gonna crash through the floor. The place was so old that the floor actually caved in a bit as I stepped around. The house was very linear. I looked to the right and saw the entrance to the kitchen, where his voice was coming from. I looked to the left, and there was a narrow hallway which had a bunch of doors on the right side. At the end of the hallway, there was this guy with his back to me, slowly dancing in the creepiest way imaginable. The man was feeling himself. I don't mean he felt confident. I mean he was literally feeling his body as he moved in this really off-putting way. In any other circumstance, I would laugh, but I was downright disturbed of what kind of house I'd just walked into. I turned away and looked to the kitchen, still holding these 2 pizza boxes. I took a few steps toward the kitchen before I even noticed the person peering around the edge of the wall separating the kitchen from the living room. It was that man's face again, still only showing like a quarter of his face. Just one of his eyes creepily peering at me. The only thoughts I had in this moment were what the fuck, and should I just leave? I repeated what I said at the front door moments ago, asking him again if he has the cash. The man didn't respond. He started to just giggle, or I don't even know what I'd call it, because the laugh was so deep in pitch, but it was so subtle and soft. Then he called out Randall in a startlingly loud voice, much louder and more commanding in tone than his previous soft-spoken monotone voice. I was at my limit of how much weirdness I could take. I turned around and started walking back to the front door, and as I took a look down the hallway as I was about to walk outside, I noticed that guy who was dancing seconds ago was now simply just standing there, looking back at me. I left through the front door and closed it behind me. I hurried back to the car, for some reason still holding the pizzas. I threw the pizza boxes in the passenger seat and got back in the car as quickly as possible. As I was backing my car up to clear the pickup truck next to it so that I could just do a 3-point turn, I did look back at the house, and the door was fully open again. My heart started beating even quicker at the thought that one of them was outside my car about to attempt to open one of the doors. Maybe they were, and I'll never know. But I managed to get my car down that dirt driveway and back onto the road. I had to return to the pizzeria. I called Frank to let him know what happened. He wasn't mad at me. When I got back to the pizzeria, everyone laughed when I told them what happened. I can honestly see how it sounds like a funny situation when explaining it to others, but it was not funny in the moment. Whatever was going on in that house wasn't normal, and I don't think they had any intentions of buying pizza. I've had multiple dreams where I would see that man's face just peeking around from behind a wall. After that, I didn't enter anyone's houses or apartments while doing deliveries. I'm currently 20 years old, although at the time of the story I was 19. I live in Newark, Delaware, a usually small and quiet town. That is, until college season rolls around in the fall and spring. Newark is home to the University of Delaware, which is a large and widely respected school in the US. It also has a reputation for being a big party school, so when the college kids arrive, things get a lot more lively. Anyway, I work as a bicycle delivery guy at Jimmy John's, a job I still work as of me telling this story. This event took place during a Tuesday or Wednesday night in the spring. It was either late April or early May, I can't remember exactly. It was my typical 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift. The Jimmy John's I work at is open until 2 on the weekdays and 3 on the weekends. This means we're one of the few places still open in town aside from the bars, so a lot of drunk college kids storm the place wanting to order. Needless to say, it gets pretty hectic. Deliveries would pop up like crazy too, which did get very annoying, but it meant a lot of tips, so I always put up with it. This was my last night working the shift, and just as 2 a.m. was about to roll around, one last delivery came in, and I was next in line to take it. This annoyed me as I just wanted to end my shift and go home to get some sleep. I sucked it up and took the delivery since I didn't have a choice. I knew the street by heart and knew where to go immediately. I should mention the reason we do bicycle deliveries is because the roads tend to be busy sometimes during college season, so using bicycles sometimes allows us to do deliveries faster. I rode my bike as fast as I could to the house in less than 10 minutes. I knocked on the door loudly, but there was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I became a little pissed when I remembered if someone didn't come out, I'd have to take the order back to the store, meaning this delivery would seriously be wasting my time. I called the number on the receipt, but no one answered. I was getting ready to call the store when I first heard it. Rustling sounds coming from some bushes directly across the street from me. I figured it was probably the wind, but decided to look anyway. When I did, I felt my stomach drop as a strong sense of dread flowed through me. I saw the dark figure of a person directly across the street from me in someone's yard, crouched behind a few bushes. And even though I couldn't make out any facial features, I knew that he or she, though I figured it was a he, was looking right at me. My heart was racing, but it didn't seem like he noticed that I noticed him. I pretended to not notice him and knocked loudly on the door again. Still, there was no answer. I began to grow more and more panicked, wondering whether or not this could be a trap. I did a quick glance, and the person was still crouched behind the bushes, watching me. I just wanted to get the hell out of there, so I decided to just continuously knock on the door as loud as possible until someone answered. It felt like hours that I was knocking, but eventually someone stumbled out from one of the rooms and sluggishly answered the door, sounding pissed. When I told him about the order, he told me that he didn't order, so that it was probably his roommate instead. To my misfortune, the person who actually ordered was upstairs in his room, passed out drunk. How he could have passed out so quickly after he ordered is still beyond me. The guy went upstairs to try and get him. Not even a minute after he went upstairs, I suddenly heard more rustling and did a quick glance back. When I did, I noticed the man had moved a little closer, probably to get a better view of me. I could tell he was still watching me. My fear intensified. I almost wanted to come inside to get away from the man watching me, but I figured he'd steal my bike, meaning I couldn't do my job anymore. Plus, I didn't know if this person was armed and if he would actually try something if I went inside, which would put the two of them in harm's way. Luckily, he was only upstairs for a minute. He said his roommate's door was locked and that he wouldn't answer the door when he knocked. At this point, I really wanted to get out of there, so I told him he could sign for his roommate's order. He hesitated at first since there wasn't a tip charged to the order, but a tip was the last thing I was thinking about at this point. I insisted over and over, and eventually he signed for his roommate. I handed it to him and gave him a quick thank you. When he shut the door, I hurried to my bike and hopped on, ready to get the hell out of there. But just as I put the kickstand up, I heard the man suddenly lunge out from behind the bushes. I quickly turned to my left and saw that man was now dashing towards me. I was able to see he was wearing what looked like jeans, boots, and a black hoodie with the hood over his head, and what I think was some sort of mask on his face, as I could only see his eyes. And although I'm not 100% on this, it looked like he was holding a blade in one of his hands. I knew I had to act quick. I couldn't bang a U-turn because he'd probably catch me before I could get away. To make matters worse, all the surrounding streets led to dead ends. My only chance was to head to a bike trail that was nearby, even though it wasn't lit up and I didn't have a light on my bike. I knew it would be my only chance. I pedaled faster than I ever had before onto the pitch-black trail and rode it, all while looking out for shadows and listening for footsteps. Luckily, the trail wasn't long and I knew it by heart. Still, I was extremely paranoid by this point, and I got startled whenever I heard any noise at all. I didn't see the man while I was on the trail, however, and I made it back to the store safely. I was hyperventilating like crazy as I tried to wrap my head around what the hell just happened. I didn't tell my boss or coworkers, nor did I call the police since I didn't get a good look at the man. I simply got my stuff, clocked out, and went to my car, putting my bike in the trunk, so thankful I decided to drive that night. I made it home safe without anyone following me, and that was that. I never saw the man again. I don't know what he wanted, whether he wanted to rob me or worse. I haven't worked another midnight shift since then, and now I carry nunchucks on me whenever I do any kind of night shift. Newark isn't known for being a dangerous town, so the fact that this happened here truly showed me that anything can happen anywhere, to anyone at any time, no matter how safe or dangerous the area may be. I used to deliver for Uber Eats. I was having trouble paying off my student loans, so I was hustling to make whatever cash I could. I still lived with my parents at the time. It was late at night. I was picking up an order from some fast food place in Wilmington, North Carolina, and delivering to some house about 20 minutes away. I often did late night deliveries and Uber rides because the pay was higher and I could bang out more deliveries and rides without traffic. I was already en route to the address. I was leaving the more populated residential area of Wilmington and heading in the direction of the quieter part with all the forest and farms. Most of the roads over there were pitch black and void of any other cars at that late hour in the night. I turned off the main road onto a side road with a dead-end sign. This was the road the directions were taking me, where the address was. I was brought to the last house on this road. The lights to almost every little house on this stretch were off. It was just pitch black. Even the house that I was supposed to be delivering the food to. I had to keep my car headlights on just to even see, and just so I wouldn't trip on anything, I also was using my flashlight on my phone to navigate my way to the porch of this house. I'm not lying when I say there was not a single light on. I even felt the overgrown grass rubbing on my shins as I walked to the front door. This didn't feel right. I pressed the doorbell button but didn't hear a ring, so I knocked. The customer had their delivery preference to be contact delivery, which means I'd have to actually physically hand it off to him or her. I messaged the customer that I'm at the front door and asked him if he could confirm the address. He read it right away and responded, "Give me a second." I replied, "Okay." He read it. I waited in the dark, looking at the windows of the house, waiting for a light inside to turn on. I was thinking there's no way this is the right house. I followed up again, asking him if he could type out his address. He started typing. It took a while before he sent a message saying, "I see you, you're at the right house." The next thing I realized was that there were no cars anywhere. This was making no sense. I asked the customer to confirm what kind of car he sees outside. He replied that he sees my light. Well, that pretty much confirmed that I was at the correct address, but it didn't make this any less sketchy. I started to just inch away from the door to the house just because I didn't want to be on top of it as they opened the door. But the door never opened, no matter how many times I messaged the customer on the Uber Eats app. I was starting to suspect this was some kind of scam to get free food. Then I heard a voice come from outside in the darkness surrounding me. It was a male's voice calling, "Over here." I started to wave my flashlight all over the place, trying to reveal whoever just said that. I said out loud, "I'm leaving the food on the front porch over here." I didn't know who I was talking to, nor could I see them. I was terrified I was about to be attacked, so I walked back to my car, not trying to draw attention by running. When I got to my car, I heard this distinct air leaking sound that I could immediately recognize to be the sound of air leaking from a slashed tire. I took a look and saw that both the tires on the left side of the car were slashed and leaking air. I could only assume in the moment that the two tires on the right side had also been slashed. I got into the car and locked the doors first thing. All 4 tires showed low tire pressure warnings on the dash. Panic started to set in. I was deciding on whether to call the police and wait in the car or making a run for it into the dark to a nearby house. I was about to pick the second option. I turned off the headlights on my car and was about to get out of the car, but I noticed someone standing outside my window. I screamed my soul out, and then I realized that there were at least 4 people standing outside of my car, one at every window. They all had on masks covering their faces. I was surrounded. One of them yelled at me to get out of the car now. I didn't know if one of them had a gun or not, and I knew that if they did, by the time I turned on the car and attempt to drive away with 4 flats, I'd have been shot dead already. I yelled through the window asking if they're just looking to rob me, and one of them said if I gave them everything on me, they'd let me go. I agreed to do so and unlocked the door. The second I did, the guy outside my door opened it and forcefully pulled me out. At this point, I was beaten and kicked by at least 3 of the guys. They grabbed everything off of me: my smartwatch, my shoes, my wallet, my phone, and even some things out of my glove compartment in my car. I was left on the ground as however many men there actually were ran away into the darkness, and I was alone. I blacked out from here, and the next thing I remember is waking up probably half an hour later, still laying on the grass next to my car. They'd stolen even my keys. I managed to get up and navigate myself to the nearest source of light I could find in the distance, which was a small house all the way up the street closer to the main road. I rang the bell a few times until someone answered through the closed door. I said I'd been injured and robbed and need to use a phone. Luckily, the woman was willing to help and allowed me to use a phone to call the police and then to call roadside assistance to have my car towed. Lastly, I called my dad. After police showed up, I was taken back to my car and they did a short investigation and took as much information as I could give them. After my car was towed away, my dad came to pick me up and bring me home. We left after my car was towed away. My phone's last location was down the street from the incident, and it hadn't been turned on since the night before, meaning they probably destroyed the phone. The next day, I gave even more information to some detectives regarding my Uber Eats account, and they rather quickly were able to trace the customer account back to a guy named Logan, who, long story short, allegedly lost his phone and wallet, and whoever found or stole them was the one to call the Uber Eats delivery with the intention of robbing me. Basically what I'm saying is whoever did this to me got away with it. The house that they set this up at was a vacant house for sale. My car tires were covered by insurance, but everything else I ate the loss. And this was a painful and expensive, but also valuable lesson to not be so naive ever again in a situation like that. I stopped deliveries for a few months. Then I went back to doing daytime deliveries. Big abandoned mental hospital in our town is always infested with rowdy teenagers drinking, graffitiing, and making a mess with silly string. Eventually the town caught wind of it, and one particular Halloween, when my friends Rye, Carl, and I wanted to go exploring, apparently the town barred off every window on the first floor of the building. Security of the perimeter was also ramped up drastically. We found out the hard way after cutting through the woods and seeing security telling a mob of teens to go home. We didn't give up there though. We snuck around the perimeter through the woods to another side with no people. Then we hopped the fence and started looking for a way in. That's when we found out that all the windows had been barricaded with carbon steel bars. We heard commotion all around us, but managed to stay under the radar. We didn't want to give up though, and through our determination to find a way in, Rye spotted one window that wasn't boarded up with steel, but rather wood planks. We all had boots on, so kicking the plank in seemed plausible. However, the window was simply too high to kick up at, so Carl and I lifted Rye and actually used him and his boots as a sort of battering ram. The wood was wet and apparently rotted, so it actually snapped rather easily. After that, we simply ripped off the remainder of wood, and boom, we had our way in. We had to hurry though, before security might see. We gave Rye a boost up since he's the shortest. Then Carl and I leaped up to the ledge and squeezed in. There was junk and debris everywhere, so I took some long, flat piece of wood and covered the window with it to hide our way of entry. After that, we were all alone in a giant abandoned psych ward to explore on Halloween. Carl brought a few cans of spray paint in his backpack that we planned to use. First, we had to find a good spot to use them. Carl also brought 3 flashlights for us since, of course, it was pitch black in there. It was also weird stepping out from the cold, windy outside with the commotion and yelling going on to the scarily dead, silent interior. We planned on going to the top to possibly get to the roof, so we looked around for the stairs going through the dead, silent hallways. It really seemed like we were the only ones who found a way inside. We eventually found the stairs and climbed like 10 half flights of stairs to, I guess, the 6th floor. However, there was one more floor, the roof level, but the stairs in the hall we were in didn't lead up there. So we had to begin our search for the separate stairs to the roof level. As we were in a long, creepy corridor, there was suddenly a huge bang down the hall. We all aimed our flashlights down there, but the hallway was too long to truly see anything all the way down there. Apparently we weren't the only ones in this building. We tried to stay clear just in case it was security, so we went the opposite direction. We checked the whole hallway, then turned down some intersecting hallway area. I was in the back, so I would occasionally just glance behind me, just because it was a dark, abandoned building. A little after turning a corner, there was a crack in a piece of wood behind me. I turned since I was the only one to seem to notice it, and right there was someone peeking their head from around the corner, looking at us. But when I noticed them, they disappeared down the other hall. I called out, "Yo." I'm not really sure if it was directed to my friends, to the person I just saw, or both. My friend stopped and looked back. We went back to the corner where the halls intersected to look down that other hallway, but the guy I saw wasn't there. My friends didn't know whether I was joking or not, but at least now I knew we weren't alone in there. Eventually, we came to a part of the hall where 90% of the floor was missing, minus a very small strip still left intact. Rai insisted we were going over that, and volunteered to go first. After looking down the hole and realizing it wasn't that much of a drop, I was okay with it. It dropped into what appeared to be a bathroom, or at least what once was a bathroom. To cross, we pressed up the front of our shoes to the wall and grabbed onto a pipe that ran up the upper wall as support. I crossed last, and my two friends apparently didn't wait for me, because they disappeared down the hall as I called for them to wait. I then slowly started to cross the extremely narrow bridge between the two sides of the hole, when suddenly, I felt something grab the back of my shoe. At first, I thought it was one of my friends messing with me, but that didn't make sense. They couldn't have gotten down there so quickly. I had no free hands to be holding my flashlight though, and my friends were already gone down the hall, so I was almost in complete darkness and couldn't see who or what was trying to pull me down into that hole. I screamed for my life, so loud it could probably be heard throughout the building. My friends came rushing back, and as light once again poured into the hole, the grip on my leg was released, and then there was a sound of running from down below. We didn't try to go down there and fight the guy. We didn't even look down there to see how he could have reached me or if he was even still there. I just forced my friends to come with me all the way down the stairs back to the first floor. But now we had another problem. We forgot how we got in. There was only that one window which wasn't barred up with steel, and we blocked it with wood. We were looking around in a hurry because of what happened. Nobody would play a joke like that. It felt like we were navigating a maze down there on the first floor looking for that stupid window. Every corner we turned, I was afraid we were going to see that face, peering from another corner. And it happened. Since I was now the one leading the three of us, I was the first to see it. At the end of the hall we were running down, there was that person hiding half his body behind the wall. This time, as opposed to last time, however, I could actually see that he was wearing a mask. Was it the same person who tried grabbing me through that hole? I don't know, but I still don't doubt it. We turned the other way and ran. We didn't stop running until we finally found that window we entered through. Climbing out was easier than climbing in, and by the time we got outside, it seemed most of the commotion going on outside was gone. Security seemed to have kicked most of the people off the premises. We could have found a security guard and warned them of a potential psychopath in the building, but that would risk us getting busted. So instead, we ran back through the woods to the car. The rest of the night, we hung out in a parking lot, and that was our 2016 Halloween. When I was 9 years old, my parents let me go trick-or-treating without them for the first time ever. I went with my best friend at the time, Mikey, who was also 9. We were to be back home by 9 o'clock the latest, though. I think it was getting close to that point when we were still out trick-or-treating. Trick-or-treating was a little worse in our town because properties were so big, so it meant more walking for less candy. We came to one house, which sat on a corner and was isolated by a set of tall bushes. We rang the bell as usual. I still remember it all so clearly. You're about to find out just why that is, though. An older man opens the door, probably in his mid-50s, thin grayish hair and a mustache. He asks what our costumes are, and talks down to us like we're 6 instead of 9. He asked us if we were with anyone else, and seemed surprised that our parents weren't with us. Then he opened the door completely to reveal some kind of obstacle course tunnel he'd set up in his living room. It was made of cardboard boxes and Halloween decorations. Admittedly, it looked cool, and when he said in order to get our candy we'd have to make it through the obstacle course, it was very tempting. Mikey and I looked at one another and said okay. The man told us to come in, but he didn't look at us as he said it. Instead, he looked outside as he slowly shut the door. I crawled into that tunnel made out of boxes first, and Mikey followed after me. It was really dark inside of this tunnel since the man had only some dim orange Halloween lights on in the room. There were fake spider webs and other Halloween toys scattered throughout the box tunnel. It was actually really big and well put together because we struggled to find the way to the other end. But when we did, it led to a small room also lit up by orange Halloween lights. There was a note in this room pointing to a door, saying "Candy down there." Mikey went to open the door, revealing stairs to the basement. There was more orange light down there. The man was nowhere to be seen though. Me and Mikey started making our way down the stairs, and when we got to the bottom, we saw nothing but a big, empty basement. Then, the door above us slammed shut. We went back up the stairs to try and open it, but it was locked. We didn't know what to do other than cry for help, but we stopped when we heard the doorbell ring upstairs. It rang repeatedly, actually. We listened by the basement door to hear anything. Then we heard what sounded like the front door opening, so we started screaming at the top of our lungs. Then there was a commotion outside the basement, like two men yelling at each other, before the door in front of us unlocked and opened, and a man and woman came up to us. The woman hugged us and told us to follow them out of the house. We followed the couple through the living room, passing the man in the corner of his room, standing over his freakish creation. The husband called the man a sick freak as we left the house. The couple took us to their house, where the husband called the cops and the wife stayed with us, asking questions like what the man said to get us inside of his house. Apparently, they'd seen us go into the man's house because they live across the street. The cops arrived, and there was an overwhelming amount of evidence for him to be arrested and tried. Of course, at the age of 9, we didn't understand the depth of the situation, but looking back now, we're all happy that those neighbors came to our rescue and justice was served that night. Halloween has been my least favorite holiday ever since I graduated college and got my own place. I hated the idea of strangers coming up to my house with their kids and asking for candy all day, but I dealt with it with a smile on my face. My property is big, but it doesn't have any fences, and times in the past I'd seen kids fight each other with silly string in my yard. Hell, I've even had kids teepee and silly string my house. One year though, late at night, past the hours where the bulk of trick-or-treaters were out, I got another ring from the doorbell, and my dog Mika started going crazy, barking as she had been doing all day. I opened the door to a person in a full-body gorilla costume. Only the face of the gorilla was freaky looking. It was a costume made to look scary. He didn't say trick or treat, he just held up a small plastic bag that was filled with some candies. Not a lot. Since it was close to the end of the night and I had a lot of candy left, I dumped a lot of it into his bag and waved goodbye. He didn't speak any words to me though, as he just stood on my stoop, slowly going through the bag, looking at the candies I just gave him. As I shut the door halfway, I stopped and continued to watch him as he looked up to me, but didn't say anything. I asked if he wanted more, but he didn't shake his head or respond or anything. He kept looking at me weirdly, so I just shut the door and locked it. I wasn't in the mood to be playing games. Plus, what he was doing was extremely unsettling. I went back downstairs to my den to continue watching the movie that I had on. That's when I heard something fall outside. The back door was right next to my couch, so I got back up and took like 5 steps to look outside. With the back patio light on, I could see a rake that had been leaning on a pole had fallen. Given how I left it sitting, it was weird for it to have fallen on its own. Being Halloween, I did feel the need to go out and investigate. I threw on my slides and went outside to pick up the rake first of all. It was not windy out at all, so it shouldn't have fallen on its own. Then I noticed the door to my shed was cracked open. I have a huge shed in my backyard that I store all of my outdoor equipment in. I went over to take a look inside. As big as the shed is, the lights haven't worked in there for years, so I had to use the light from my phone screen on full brightness as a flashlight of sorts. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I certainly wasn't expecting to find a gorilla mask sitting on a big box. I knew right away. The light from the phone screen only traveled so far, but I still dared walk further into the shed until I saw him in the corner. There was the person in the gorilla suit, only now he had his mask off. I stepped a little closer and realized he was facing the wall, just standing motionless. He was also not a kid, rather some old, terrifying-looking man. I didn't know if he heard or saw me yet, so I started backing away slowly. But even though I didn't make a sound, his head suddenly turned to face me. It nearly made me shit myself or have a heart attack. I ran back outside and slammed the shed door shut behind me. I then ran back to my back house door and heard the door to the shed open with a lot of force. I didn't look back, I just went inside and locked the door. Then, of course, I called the police to report a trespasser on my property. It figures, however, by the time the cops arrived, the guy in the gorilla suit was gone, mask and all. All they could do was assure me they'd be on the lookout for someone in a gorilla suit. Then they went on their way. After that, I didn't have much interest in finishing the movie, so I went upstairs and called it a night. That night in bed, I did wake up to Mika barking downstairs though, so I left my room to see where she was. She was in the den, by the back door, barking ferociously. I took a quick look outside, without letting Mika out with me, but I didn't see anyone, and the shed door was still shut. Still, I felt creeped out being out in that yard that night, so I hurried back in and brought Mika up to sleep in my room with me. I fell asleep, not without hearing Mika growling slightly occasionally, which freaked me out a lot. The next morning and ever since, life has been completely normal, and that was by far the scariest Halloween I've ever had. I was 14, 8th grade, last year of middle school. I had to go, so I got up from my seat in math class, took the wooden plank that was supposed to be the bathroom pass, and strolled through the hallways to the bathroom. The bathroom on the main floor had a sign on it saying out of order, use upstairs or downstairs bathroom. A random older guy walked up to me and asked with a smile on his face if I knew where the nearest bathroom was. I told him yeah, either upstairs or downstairs. He thanked me and walked to the stairs. So to avoid more potential conversation with the guy, I went down. I wondered who that guy could be, definitely not staff. Maybe a parent. I went down to the lower level, which was literally only for bathrooms and extra locker rooms for the sport teams. I opened the door to the bathroom. The light was off, as usual for this bathroom since it was the least used one. I went to the stall and shut the door. I covered the toilet seat with paper and sat down. Suddenly, there was a white light flashing in the bathroom, and I heard the sound of the fire alarm outside of the bathroom. It was a fire drill. My heart dropped because I didn't know what to do. It was the first fire drill of the year. Would I get away with just using the bathroom while everyone else was outside? At this point, I figured I'd just do it. The flashing light got a bit annoying, as did the alarm coming from outside. Suddenly, the alarm got much louder. Then I realized it was because the door opened, and over came marching somebody right to my stall door. I saw their feet underneath the stall. I thought for sure it was a teacher coming to check the room for any students. They didn't say anything though. I didn't know if I should say something or not. I looked at their shoes.
They were just facing the door, but I noticed they weren't just standing there. I saw through that dreaded 1-inch crack of the stall door that everybody hates, someone's face pressed up against it. Most apparently, a man's eye, open as wide as possible. Then there was a chuckle from the other side. I was breathing heavily now, heart racing too. I didn't know if I should scream or not. Then, the person got on his knees and stuck his head underneath the stall to look at me. It was that man from the hallway. When he saw it was me, he literally crawled under the door and into the stall and grabbed a hold of me, covering my mouth first thing. I remember he said things like, "Don't struggle and just relax." I didn't know what he was going to do to me. It was an unreal feeling, like my life was flashing before my eyes at such a young age, an age that you think you're invincible. Then, the fire alarm got louder again as the door opened. It was the principal's voice. "Is anybody in here?" I screamed, and though muffled through the man's hand, the principal heard it and came rushing over to the stall trying to open it. He screamed to open the door. The man let go of me, opened the door in the principal's face, and ran for it. The principal was a very old man, so he didn't chase after him. The school also didn't have cameras at this point, so as far as I know, the guy got away. The principal actually hugged me and was very emotional, telling me to come with him so we could call my parents. All my friends saw me almost in tears walking with my parents to their car. It was humiliating, but I was also just happy. The principal saw the man pull the fire alarm and run downstairs, so he slowly but surely made his way down there and checked the bathroom first thing. He unfortunately passed away 5 years ago. I still have great appreciation for that principal. He was my hero in a certain way. Back in high school, fire drills were usually a lot of fun, depending on what class you were in and which friends you were with. One particular dark, cloudy day during third period, my friends and I who were in the same class heard from the grapevine that there was going to be a fire drill this period. It was a Friday close to the end of the year, and there was really no work for any of us in our later classes. So we figured during the fire drill we'd sneak down to the sump behind the school by the woods and smoke. We waited anxiously for that ear-piercing ringing to go off, and when it did, it was music to our ears. We looked at each other and laughed, and we were the first ones out of the class and down the hall. While everyone else on this side of the school was headed to the front entrance, we were on our way to the back entrance by the woods. We walked out in the middle of the crowd to the back section of the school by the basketball and tennis courts. We were pretty strategic about our escape. We made sure there were no teachers in sight and crossed through a narrow opening between the tennis courts and a line of bushes. That led straight to the sump. A couple of kids watched us and probably thought we were a bunch of weirdos, but it didn't matter. We made it to the sump, which was literally a giant hole in the ground surrounded by bushes and trees, right at the edge of the woods. It had a nickname, but I don't remember it. All I know is it was the place that everyone came to drink, smoke, and do other drugs at night. Kids even had bonfires there before. It was a really dark day. The clouds were a darkish gray, giving the morning an almost early night kind of feeling. The breezy air hinted at a storm approaching too, which honestly just made it more fun for some reason. We waited until all the commotion up the hill quieted down, and we assumed everyone went back inside. Then we started talking and laughing. My friend went through his bag to get out that pipe and grinder. That's when I noticed something in the distance by the woods. It looked kind of like a person's face. A couple shrubs covered where the body would be, but what I saw just looked too much like a face. I looked away for a second to get my friend's attention and then pointed in the direction of it, but when I looked back, it was gone. They thought I was an idiot, but now that it was gone, I was like 70% sure what I saw was a person. The other 30% of me wasn't sure if I was just imagining things. It was very dark after all. They didn't want to move though, so I didn't either. We smoked, and the higher I got, the more paranoid I got. I secretly never really enjoyed smoking too much for that reason. It gets me paranoid. But I went along with it just because it was what my group of friends did. Now that I was high, all that I was thinking of was that face in the woods. Did someone see us? Were we gonna get in trouble? That's all I could think about. My friends wanted to walk through the woods now to an old shack that used to be used by the school for something. It was about a minute walk into the woods. I was uncomfortable with it. The air started to feel moist, and I started to feel those tiny pre-storm rain droplets. I once again warned them that we should go back because of the storm. They kind of ignored me. On the way there, I swore I could hear footsteps that weren't ours. But honestly, I was so high I didn't even know where I was hearing them from. In front of us, behind us, to the left, right, I had no idea. Then, from behind us, I was sure I heard a big stick snap in half. I stopped and turned around, saying loudly, "What the fuck was that?" My friends stopped too, but they didn't hear it apparently. There was nobody visible behind us, and once again my friends thought I was an idiot. Apparently I seemed like I was losing my mind because I became the blunt of all my friends' jokes after that. The big old shack finally came into view. It was bigger than I remembered, and more creepy looking. The school stopped using this old building years ago, probably because it looked like it was about to collapse. Even the path that led to the front door had grass growing through the cracks. The front door was wedged open, of course. Surely students came in there all the time. My friend Jack pushed open the door fully with force. It was so dark in there. There was little light from outside to begin with. It seemed like there was just a bunch of old, empty crates, a lot of them smashed to pieces. There was a kind of nasty smell, however, one that my friends didn't remember the last time we were in there. The sound of something squishy plopping on the ground, and then a foot hitting the wood floor made us all jump. In the corner of the room was the shadow outline of a really tall person. We could only see him due to the little amount of light sneaking in through the window. We didn't scream or anything. We simply walked out the door the way we came in and walked quickly back in the direction of the school, aka civilization. All three of us took a look back at the window nearest to the person, and I swear to God, at that exact moment, the first flash of lightning struck, and what we saw during that flash was nothing short of horrifying. There was a guy with a seriously deformed face standing at the window, and I don't mean to talk ill of anyone with any kind of deformity, but this man almost didn't look human. Half of his face seemed to be drooping down. You couldn't even see one of his eyes. He was so close to the window too, his face was practically pressed up against it. I initiated a run and my friends followed. We got back down to the sump in less than a minute, where we collected our thoughts on what to do next, just as the rain started to finally come down. And just then, my friend Jack pointed up the hill back to the woods. There was a person standing behind a shrub, exposing only his face, just like what I saw before. This time 10 times closer, but still not close enough to describe his face. All I know is it wasn't the same person as in the shack. We ran back to the school and hid by the back entrance where it was dry. We all came to an agreement to just go home, forget about what just happened, not to tell anyone, and never go back to that shack again. And that was exactly what we did. Our school had this door that led down to a half stairway to some weird dark hallway. A lot of students knew about it, but nobody really knew what was down there. The door only seemed to be open during fire drills, in which just about every door in the building is opened. My friend Kyle and I were particularly interested in finding out what was down there. I'll admit I was a pretty bad student in my first 2 years of high school, and I got into a lot of trouble. So Kyle and I planning to venture down there during a fire drill wasn't one of our dumbest ideas. We had 3 classes together out of 8, so our chances of being in the same class during a fire drill was pretty decent, and luckily it happened during study hall. So as the alarm rang, Kyle and I ran to one of the bathrooms, which already had its door wedged open with a door stopper. We hid in one of the stalls until all the commotion in the hall was gone and everyone was outside. Then, getting down those stairs was a piece of cake. There was a very dim light hanging from the ceiling. It gave off just enough light to see a doorway that led to another half flight of stairs, this one to complete darkness. We looked for a light switch but couldn't find one. We used the screens on our phones as light to navigate the dark. We found a door that had a "Do Not Enter" sign on it. Of course, what did we do? We opened the door, struggling at that nonetheless. It felt like it was 1,000 pounds, and it scraped along the floor as if it had fallen off its hinges. When we managed to get it open, we found just a small, square room, maybe 100 square feet. The room wasn't silent though. There was a little clicking sound, kind of like a metallic dinging. It was coming from a vent in the corner. We had to see what it could be. Maybe an animal or something. But as we went closer, we started to hear grunting and groaning type noises. Kyle dared me to hover the screen over the vent to see what was inside. I really wanted to know what was in there, so I did. I pressed the screen of my phone up to the vents and got on my knees. Now I could hear breathing. I pressed my ear up against the vent and immediately felt something grab onto my ear. I screamed in a panic, and Kyle quickly came and pulled the hand off my ear. I jumped away from the vent first of all, and saw a hand reaching through it. Kyle and I ran out of there, shutting the "Do Not Enter" door behind us and running back upstairs to the bathroom. The next day, Kyle and I went to talk to the janitor, Tom. He was one of the janitors who didn't really give a crap about his job. He didn't even seem angry about us going down there, he just asked what we were doing. We explained what happened and asked if there was somebody working in the vents. He said nobody had been in that room for years, nor was there any way into that vent down there. Kyle and I looked at each other, and I knew his heart sank just like mine did, as we both stood there wondering, who was in that vent down there that day? Meeting my ex-girlfriend's family during the holidays was the worst weekend of my life. They lived in a different state than my ex Kaylee and I. We were on Long Island in New York. They were all the way up in Vermont. Our relationship was still kind of new, but she seemed to think it was serious enough for her parents to invite the two of us up there for Christmas. Kaylee had a really small family, so apparently it would be just the two of us, her brother, and her parents. Pulling up to the house was a pleasant surprise. The house was beautiful and it stood on a huge, well-kept property secluded from any other houses. As Kaylee and I got out of my truck, her parents came out to the porch to greet us. First impressions, they seemed friendly and weird. An unexplainable type of friendly. The father didn't smile, but he shook my hand, patted me on the back, and said it was great to meet me. The mother hugged me, showing a lot more emotion, but something about her face was a bit off-putting. She had a really wide smile that seemed a bit exaggerated. The house was as beautiful inside as it was outside. It had a wooden lodge-type atmosphere to it. A little while later, I met Katie's brother Paul, who got home from work. He was a really socially awkward dude. He had a bowl cut and had a whole tattoo sleeve running up his arm. We had dinner, which was awkward at certain moments, but other than that, it was kind of normal. After dinner, we watched a Christmas movie in the living room. I tried not to make eye contact, but I could tell Paul kept looking at me for extended periods of time, on a few different occasions. At one point, I finally looked back at him, and we locked eyes for like 3 seconds before he turned back to the TV. He was giving me the most judgmental stare I'd ever seen, and it made me only more uncomfortable. At the end of the night, Kaylee and I were in the guest room, which had an attached bathroom. Kaylee was in the bathroom. She left her phone on the nightstand. I saw she got a text from her mom, and for some reason, feeling a bit snoopy, I got up to read it. It was not at all what I was expecting, and it changed the whole night completely. Briefly on the screen, it said, "Text from Mom. Do you think he suspects anything yet?" But the message quickly switched to new message, I'm guessing because she had iMessage notifications set to hide once the phone locks. I wanted to read what was said before that, but her phone had a password, unfortunately. I could actually feel my heart pumping now. Kaylee came back into the room. I kind of gave her the cold shoulder because my mind was racing. She seemed to notice. She was texting on her phone for a bit before turning out the lamp and going to sleep. I couldn't sleep though. I was rolling around for hours wondering what that text meant and if it was about me. And what the hell was up with her brother? It was exactly 2 in the morning when I heard Kaylee get out of bed, but she was doing so very quietly. Normally I'd find this to be a kind gesture, but under the circumstances, I was finding this suspicious now. I didn't move. I pretended to still be asleep. I heard her come to my side of the bed and stand there for a few moments, then leaving the room and walking downstairs. Then I heard someone else walking downstairs, and then another person. Something was going on. I went over to the top of the stairs to listen to what was going on downstairs. There was a bunch of talking, but in very low voices. I walked down a few stairs quietly. The talking was coming from the dining room by the stairs. It sounded like they were planning something. I heard Kaylee say something like, "When I go back up, you stand by the door." Then I heard her brother say something, but what was going on was really starting to hit me in the face, or at least what I think was going on. I went back to the room to grab my stuff and leave. As I was grabbing the keys, I noticed something in the corner of the room. I turned the lamp on, which exposed Kaylee's dad sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, blank expression on his face behind his glasses, staring at me. I screamed at least 4 times, "You're all crazy," as I ran to my car. I put the car in drive practically before the car was even fully on and floored it out of that long driveway back to the road. I didn't stop once except for gas, and at that gas stop I checked my phone and saw Kaylee texted me saying, "What the fuck happened?" I didn't respond, not until later that night when I got home. I said, "I don't know what you and your sick family were planning on doing to me. I don't want to know. Don't ever contact me or come near me again, and I won't report this." I said this only because I knew there was no proof at all of what happened, or what might have been about to happen. She never replied. It was Christmas Eve night, 1 in the morning. I was in our den watching TV because I always like to stay up extra late on Christmas Eve. To make things more festive and cozy feeling, it was during a snowstorm. I left the window open and the backyard light on just so I could also have the view of the snow in the backyard. I was focused on the TV at the moment, but through my peripheral vision, I thought I could briefly see something in the backyard. I turned to the window, but besides the falling snow, there was nothing going on out there. Still, I got up and went to the window just to be sure. Nothing. I sat back down on the couch, but now I was constantly checking the window to see if anything was outside. About 10 minutes later, I calmed down and forgot about it and reverted my full attention back to the movie. Then I heard, loud and clear, the backyard gate slam shut. Now I almost knew someone was back there. I slipped on my shoes and a jacket and went out to the backyard to check it out. There were boot marks in the snow leading from one gate across the yard to the other gate. I was not feeling brave enough to follow them, so I went back inside. As I was taking off my boots and jacket, I saw a track of wet, muddy snow on the den carpet, leading from the office to the hallway that led to the living room. That was also the way to my parents' room. First, I had to go to the office to see how they broke in, so I followed the boot marks to the office without turning on any lights to make my presence known. I was expecting to see one of the windows busted open, but everything was intact. Then I realized the boot marks didn't start in this room. They ended in this room. I slowly lifted my head up to the garage door in the corner of the room. It was open, and right under the doorway there was someone in a winter coat, jeans, and boots, squatting down as if trying to hide, back facing me, but his head turned to look at me. I stood there with my mouth open in horror for a few seconds before I ran for it to my parents' room, screaming the whole way there. I got my dad to come out as quickly as possible, and on our way to the garage together, we heard the actual garage door opening. By the time we got there, the intruder was gone. Realistically, we could have followed his boot marks, but who knows how far he'd gotten by that point. We found out he broke in through an unlocked living room window. Just goes to show, if somebody has intentions of breaking into your house, they'll find a way, which is why you should always lock all your doors and windows. I'm the oldest of 4, and during the events of the story, I was 16, my younger sister was 11, and my 2 younger brothers were 8 and 7. My parents and their group of friends were a part of a club that was basically for rich, snobby people. The club always hosted a Christmas party one night in December each year at a big fancy firehouse. Of course, for all the younger kids, like my siblings, somebody would always dress up as Santa Claus and hand out the presents that were left in a sack by a chair, which had a red blanket over it. This year, my dad's best friend Michael was dressing up as Santa. He was sitting at the same table as us, so when the time came for him to leave and get changed into the Santa suit, I saw him get up and walk out the door. There were like 20 young kids there, they never noticed. Everyone was having a good time, chatting and whatnot, kids playing on the floor in the center of the room, when the door to the firehouse opened and bells were heard jingling. All the kids jumped up yelling Santa, and in came Michael in a surprisingly unimpressive Santa costume. It honestly looked like the cheapest thing he could find at Party City. A serious downgrade from last year. The hat and the beard were alright, but the costume just seemed cheap. Not the usual costume the club supplied. He chuckled and did his best Santa impression. I had to say, he was doing a really good job of changing his voice though. I saw a few of my parents' friends whispering to each other. Michael grabbed the bag of gifts and said in his best Santa voice he'd be right back with the presents. He sounded so different though. He walked out the door with the bag of gifts. That's when my dad and a couple other guys ran after him yelling, "Hey." I still didn't know what was going on. Not until my mom told me that wasn't Michael. I wanted to feel important, I guess, so I ran outside to the parking lot as well, where I found my dad and 2 other guys standing there, looking around dumbfounded. The man dressed as Santa was gone. The real thing they were concerned about was where Michael was. Michael's car was also missing. I asked them if they were sure that wasn't Michael. They were all positive though. We tried calling Michael, but his phone was off. We tried his house phone after a while too, which went to voicemail. We had to send a search party, but we couldn't find him anywhere though. Eventually my dad and I returned to the firehouse to pick up my mom and siblings. Just about everyone went home by then. I waited outside. I heard a scream for help in the distance. It came from the woods, deep in the woods. I ran to the tree line to scream back Michael's name. He yelled back help again. It was him. I was too excited to go back for my dad, so I ran into the woods following his screams for help, and I found him, tied to a tree in a bloody mess. Blood was dripping from his forehead. Meeting my ex-girlfriend's family during the holidays was the worst weekend of my life. They lived in a different state than my ex Kaylee and I. We were on Long Island in New York. They were all the way up in Vermont. Our relationship was still kind of new, but she seemed to think it was serious enough for her parents to invite the two of us up there for Christmas. Kaylee had a really small family, so apparently it would be just the two of us, her brother, and her parents. Pulling up to the house was a pleasant surprise. The house was beautiful, and it stood on a huge, well-kept property secluded from any other houses. As Kaylee and I got out of my truck, our parents came out to the porch to greet us. First impressions, they seemed friendly and weird, an unexplainable type of friendly. The father didn't smile, but he shook my hand, patted me on the back, and said it was I once took a trek on the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania, which is the longest hiking-only trail in the world. I went it alone just for fun. I went late in the fall though, so it was cold and there weren't many other people hiking. In fact, I think I only ran into like 2 other people going the opposite way. The part of the trail I was on was in thick forest, and it was definitely a scenic walk. The trail ran alongside a small river, and nothing could be heard but the sound of the flowing river and the early morning birds chirping. It was time for me to sit down and take a break, so I found a big rock sitting aside the river and sat down on it. I took a sip of my Gatorade, and then I could swear I was hearing a baby's cries coming from the distance. It was coming from further down the trail in the direction I was walking. Of course, I had to get up and follow the sound of it, because of that off chance that a baby was stranded in the woods alone. As I walked further down the trail though, it seemed like the baby's cries stayed the same distance away. This went on for like half a minute of walking fast before I gave up, and assumed it was somebody with a baby walking down the trail. I sat down on another rock I found on the side of the trail by the river. Eventually the crying seemed to just stop. Like it didn't fade away really, it just stopped abruptly. I sat on that rock for 5 minutes, just taking in the nature and taking a few videos on my phone. That's when I heard footsteps approaching nearby. Expecting to see another hiker walking the trail, I saw some frantic-looking woman hurrying over to me. She came so fast and so close that it actually scared me. She stopped uncomfortably close to my face and started screaming at me, "Have you seen my baby?" I calmly told her I heard a baby crying not too long ago, and told her to follow me. We walked quickly down the trail in the direction I was chasing the sounds of the baby earlier. I looked back every few seconds to make sure she was keeping up with me. Eventually I summoned up the nerve to ask her how on earth she lost her baby, but she didn't answer. So I turned around again and stopped when I saw she was gone. And the weird thing, she was right on my tail just 10 seconds ago. I screamed out for her a few times, but the only sounds around me were the sounds of the birds chirping and the river. I figured even if she trailed off away from me, I would at least still be able to see her in the distance. I stood there for a long time deciding what to do next. Just move on with my life and continue the trail, or walk back and try to find this woman. I did one more quick 180-degree scan of the area we just came from, and what I saw next may not sound very disturbing, but it was disturbing to me in that very spot. I saw the woman standing across the river, arms hanging lifelessly at her sides, and she was looking at me. Not saying anything, not moving a muscle, blank expression. Just standing like a statue, watching me. I had made up my decision right there, and that was to move the hell on with my life right there. I walked as fast as I could away from there until my calves hurt from walking so fast for so long. Eventually I made it back to my car after looping around another trail. I cut the hike short after what happened. I was truly unsettled by it and even started to question my sanity. Like, did that actually even happen? It seemed so unreal, and yet, at the same time, it felt real in the sense that I lived it. I just want to know if anyone else who hiked the Appalachian Trail had any kind of freakish experiences like this. I have a preserve by my house since we live in a highly populated suburban area and there isn't much green. It's a huge preserve with miles and miles worth of biking and hiking trails. So long story short, one night in 2016 at like 11 at night, I decided to go for a run. I'm weird in the sense that I like to avoid people when I go for runs. That's just how I am. I held my phone with a tight grip with the flashlight on and started my run at the edge of the preserve onto the dirt hiking trail. I felt I had more energy running at night too. It was weird, I don't know how to describe it. There were no lights at all, it was all just nature. There was also a dead body that came up in the previous week in the preserve, but I didn't really let that concern me too much since I live in one of the safest neighborhoods in the state. It was also a weeknight, so there was literally no one else in this preserve but me. Well, that's at least what I thought. I got tired after about 10 minutes of running. Yeah, I used to be out of shape. I had to catch my breath, so the first bench I found, I sat down on. I have to admit, it was creepy as hell being in a pitch black preserve like that all alone. It feels the same as being alone in the middle of a forest. There were weird sounds coming from all around, and to be quite honest with you, it was scaring me. Of course, most of them were animals, so when I heard leaves and sticks crunching nearby, I assumed it was a raccoon or fox or something. But anyone's worst nightmare came true when I noticed something tall hiding behind one of the trees. I couldn't quite tell what it was because an iPhone's flashlight is only so bright. I stood up and walked a little closer, and I was kind of doing a crouch walk because for some reason I thought that would make me more low-key. I got close enough to where I saw a hand wrapped around one of the trees. The hand was in a white glove though. I felt like my heart sank. Like I was suddenly in a life or death situation before I could even see who was behind that tree. Then they finally decided to reveal themselves. Someone dressed as a clown stepped into the range of my flashlight. I wanted to wait until now to mention this was back during the clown epidemic in 2016. From what I could see in the little light I had, this person went all out with his clown costume, from the makeup right down to the clown shoes. The most disturbing part was the bat with a large foot-long spike wedged through it that he was holding. His head was angled down to give a more menacing, terrifying look, and he walked very slowly towards me. I had only one option, and that was to run as fast as I could, even though I was already so tired. I didn't run on the trail. Instead, I ran into the woods until I felt like I was going to puke. Then I shut off the flashlight and crouched down behind a tree. I heard running zoom past me maybe 10 feet away. When the footsteps faded away into the distance, I ran back to the trail and ran all the way back the way I came. And I actually puked by the time I made it to the street just from running so much. I didn't mention it before, but everyone figured that the dead body found the week before was linked to the clown epidemic. It should go without saying I stayed away from the preserve for a while, and I definitely never went in there past dark ever again. I went on a solo camping trip to the woods a few miles from my house. After setting up camp and eating, I took a half-hour nap in my tent and went for a hike. It was a normal hike in a rather quiet forest, until I thought I could hear footsteps nearby. I could have just chalked them up to being the footsteps of an animal, but they kind of sounded human-like, if that makes sense. Considering how deep into the woods I was and how far from any real urbanization I was, it would definitely be odd to cross paths with another person there. I didn't go looking around for anyone though, I just continued with my hike. When I got back to my tent, the first thing that I noticed was that the zipper to my tent was undone and the door flap was open. Right away, my heart was racing at the thought of someone having been in my tent. I checked to make sure that nobody was still in there first, and then went inside to see that my bag had been gone through. Surprisingly, nothing was taken though. I I contemplated packing up and moving spots, but I figured it was pointless. Whoever came already scoped out the place and left, therefore they wouldn't have a reason to come back. Fast forward to that night when I finally got in my tent to go to sleep. A few minutes after getting in my sleeping bag, I heard a noise. The first time I heard it, I had no idea what it could be, but the second time I heard it, it sounded like a staticky breathing sound. I sat up and looked around my tent, and at that point it went silent. So after sitting up with my heart racing for a decent while, I laid back down and tried to move past it. But after not even having my eyes closed for 10 seconds, I heard it again. Some kind of grainy, staticky breathing noise. I started digging through my bag and found something I knew for certain I didn't bring with me. I pulled out a huge, archaic-looking walkie-talkie type thing, and the static was emanating from that. I instantly associated it with the footsteps and whoever searched my tent. But all I was thinking was, why would they put that there? Just then the static stopped and there was a breathing sound once more coming from the big walkie-talkie type thing. And then in a deep, almost unintelligible whisper, I heard the words,
"I'm outside your tent."
It's crazy how in just a couple seconds your whole world can change, and how your whole body can become overcome with fear. I frantically pressed buttons on the oversized walkie-talkie until it finally seemed to turn off. Then, I heard something hit the ground outside, something heavy. I had a choice. Do I stand ground and protect my belongings and myself, or do I make a straight dash for the pickup truck? When I heard something else hit the ground right outside the tent, I chose the latter and made a run for my pickup. I left behind my tent, my sleeping bag, and other equipment, but in reality none of that stuff really mattered when my life was potentially on the line. For all I know, it was some kind of trap to just get me to leave all my stuff behind for them to take. Or it could have genuinely been someone who intended on harming me.
So this was told to me by an old family friend, Nikki, numerous times as a kid growing up, as one of those life advice stories to keep in mind through the years. And to her credit, I've never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with hitchhiking comes up, it always springs to mind, and probably always will. Even makes me a bit ill whenever I think about it, actually. So Nikki, who grew up at the same time as my dad, so this was about early 80s, I believe, she was a young woman in her mid-20s. She's one of those real kind-hearted souls, always willing to help another out in a time of need, you know? And I can't imagine her being anything other than that when she was younger, so I totally see her doing this too. So driving into the city, which was about a 2-hour drive from town, she saw a man walking down the side of the road. As she neared, he turned and, in typical hitchhiker manner, stuck out the old arm and thumb. Nikki, bless her heart, pulled over and asked him if he needed any help. She told me he was really polite, if not a bit shy, when he asked for a lift into the city. Nikki gave a smile and popped open the passenger door for the guy, who then tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up for the ride ahead. They talked pleasantly for most of the trip, about friends, the news, etc. You know, happy small talk. She felt that they were getting along very well, and even bought him dinner at the pit stop a little over halfway there. She says he seemed really flustered and awkward when she paid, but one of the things they talked about was money and how he was pretty damn strapped for cash, which was why he was hitchhiking in the first place. But he eventually relented and they went on their way. As soon as they got into the city, he thanked her profusely for the ride and the food and asked to be dropped off once they hit downtown. Before getting out, he asked for Nikki's phone number so he could contact her one day and maybe catch up. Thrilled at the prospect of knowing how her new friend was faring, Nikki wrote it down for him and drove off with the warm feeling of having done a good deed. Now, I'm sorry if you were expecting something creepy to have happened by now.
But I think this is what freaked me out so much as a kid. How nice everything seemed to have worked out. Nikki gets this crease in her forehead and a funny look in her eye when she tells me this next part. How a week later she got a phone call from the same man she had picked up. He didn't let her get a word in edgewise after hello and told her that she should thank God that she was raised so nice, because when he first got in the car, he was planning on raping and murdering her once they got to that pit stop. That he was going to steal that car and dump her body in a ditch further down the road and go on his merry way. But after she talked with him so kindly and even treated him to dinner with a smile on her face, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't think that he could live with himself after doing that to such a nice lady. The man's final words on the phone were, "Please, Nikki, please, never ever pick up another hitchhiker." Then he hung up the phone. Nikki never got a call from him again. When she tried redialing the number, she got a payphone. And so, I've learned one important thing from this story. That I'm going to take that man's advice and never, ever pick up a hitchhiker.
The Wrong Hitchhiker by Nathan Bartholomew. I've learned one thing from my one and only experience picking up a hitchhiker. Don't pick up a hitchhiker. It was a Saturday night, probably around 1 in the morning. I was driving down the 542 in New Jersey, a route I commonly took to get into town. It was a long stretch of nothing but woods on either side with the occasional residence. I was on my way back home from town, and as usual at this time of night around our quiet old town, there was not a single other car on the road. I turned on the off-road lights on my Jeep to have optimal vision on the unlit highway, which allowed me to spot somebody far down the road, just standing at the side. As I got closer, I saw him raise his arm up and stick up his thumb. He was trying to hitch a ride. My heart started racing. I had no idea if I should stop or not. I slowed down just to get a better look at the guy, first of all. He seemed like a younger man, maybe 28. He had on a light gray hoodie with the hood over his head and blue denim jeans. The time to make a decision was immediate, and with a lack of my better judgment in the heat of the moment, I came to a stop, rolled down the window, and asked, "Where are you heading to, friend?" "Just up the road," he said in a deep, quiet tone. "Hop in," I called out the window. He opened the door to my Jeep and stepped inside slowly. Jeep Wranglers have very tight seals on the doors, so when he tried to close the door the first time, it didn't shut. I politely said, "Oh, the door didn't shut. Just open and slam it shut real hard. These doors are hard to close." The body language he was giving off in response was unsettling. About 3 seconds after I had finished my sentence, he looked at me, then turned his head slowly to the right, and again waited 3 or 4 more seconds before finally opening the door and then slamming it back shut. By the way this guy was moving, I already regretted my decision to let him in. I put my foot on the gas and we started moving along the road. The speed limit on this road was 55, but I was going 75 just to get the guy to his destination quicker. "So, how far did you say you're going?" There was an awkward gap of silence before he replied with, "Just a few miles up." I wanted to turn the radio on to kill this awkward and downright creepy silence, but something in my head told me not to for whatever reason. Suddenly, I could see just through the corner of my eye that the man had turned his head and was staring in my direction. At this point, I was telling myself that I needed to get this guy out of my car. For a good mile, I felt his gaze just hitting me like a brick, and all the while I tried my best not to look back. Finally, he turned his head the other way and said, "You know, I've been wondering for the longest time if it's just worth it to end it all." I looked at him in confusion. He dug his hand into his pocket and said, "I've been carrying this knife with me for the past few weeks, wondering when the right time would come." He pulled out a big red knife from his pocket, and at that instant I felt like my stomach had dropped out of my body. I told him to put the knife away immediately. He told me in a calm, emotionless voice, "Pull over next to that sign." I did what he said, coming to a stop next to a speed limit sign, and what followed still haunts me. He began to slit his forearm next to 3 other scars from previous assumed self-inflicted cuts, and let out a disturbing moan. I managed to choke out the words, "You need to get out of my car right now, buddy." He looked at me again and said, "Get out of the car. I want to show you something." I told him no, and he raised his knife up closer to me as an obvious threat. "Just get out for a second. There's something I want to show you behind that sign." I knew my life was on the line and I had to be smart. I said, "Yeah, okay, man. Let's go." I opened the door to my Jeep, making a point of leaving it open, raised my hands in the air and backed away slowly from the door. He too left the car and started walking over to my side. At the exact moment that he was directly behind the car, I jumped back in, threw it into drive, and floored it down the road, never looking back. I got back home within 10 minutes, still breathing heavily and wanting to throw up. This was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, and I urge everybody and anybody that if you by some chance see a hitchhiker on a dead road at some odd hours of the night, do not take any course of action other than speeding right past them.
Three months after I turned 16 in 2005, I got my first car, a '99 Toyota Camry. On a warm Saturday night, when my friend Alex invited me over to one of his friend's big parties, I knew I wouldn't be in a condition to drive the Camry home afterward. So we carpooled with Alex's girlfriend Brianna. We lived in the countryside of Virginia, meaning less big parties, meaning when there was a big party it was a huge deal and everyone would go. We lived about 5 to 10 minutes away from this kid's house. I knew where he lived as I was acquainted with him, but not exactly friends. The whole ride there, we took the same 2-lane highway type road through the woods, and this kid's house was actually on this road further down. At certain points on this road, there were a few houses on either side, and then it would just go back to being a long, empty highway again. The house was tiny, like a lot of houses around the area, but the party was held outside anyways, since his closest neighbors were relatively far away, and noise wasn't an issue. I'll skip most of the party up until the point that Brianna, who was supposed to be our designated driver, had to suddenly leave for a small family emergency. Alex said it was fine and that we'd find a ride home. Well, fast forward another few hours and another few drinks, and I could barely even walk straight. I checked my watch, and it was like 2 in the morning. I figured it was time to go. I started looking for Alex, but I couldn't find him anywhere. In fact, it seemed like everybody I knew had already left. I could barely even think straight, but I was still furious at the fact that Alex could have actually left without me. I asked to use the party host's phone and dialed Alex's home number. After 2 tries, I gave up and then realized I shouldn't wake his family up. So, literally not knowing what else to do, I dizzily stepped out onto the road and began walking back home. I knew this walk would take anywhere from half an hour to an hour in my condition. Maybe after 15 minutes of walking down the road, the slight shine of car headlights on the road was fading in from behind me. Jumping for joy inside, I lifted up my arm and stuck out my thumb. As the car neared, it slowed down and came to a stop right next to me. The man driving the '98 Ford Explorer rolled down the window and asked where you headed. I told him my house was just down the road and beyond a right turn, probably slurring my words beyond comprehension. He chuckled and told me to hop in. I thanked him and joyously hopped into the truck. I was exhausted, and I remember completely disregarding things the guy was asking me because I was so close to just passing out. And that's what happened. The memories of being in that truck turned to a fog as I'm sure I passed out. The next thing I remember, I woke up still in the moving truck. The guy looked at me and laughed, but didn't say anything. I looked around and realized the road we were on wasn't familiar. I nervously asked, where are we going? He then said, so what were you doing out this late anyway? As the man answered my very straightforward question with another irrelevant question, the sobering reality of the situation hit me. You can let me out anywhere, I told the man. The man responded with a firm no. I felt like throwing up as he said that. No, I really actually felt like I was going to throw up. I started to gag as I felt more and more nauseous by the second. The man took his eyes off the road to look at me, and that's when I thought of the perfect distraction. I turned in his direction as I continued to gag, and he started to kind of lean away and slow down the car. Thankfully, I drank as much as I did because I finally threw up and made a point of doing it all over the man's lap. The man yelled in frustration and stopped the car, and that's when I took it upon myself to run for my life into the woods and duck behind a few bushes. The man came following into the woods with a flashlight, and on 2 separate occasions, he shined the light straight over me without noticing. Eventually, I heard his footsteps walk even further into the woods past me. That was when I ran back to his truck, but unfortunately, he was smart enough to lock it. By some miracle, I saw another car approaching in the distance, and I ran out into the middle of the street, waving my arms like a lunatic. The car tried to avoid me, but I wouldn't let it. They were forced to stop, and I yelled at them to help me before they came back. Once I told them that I was kidnapped by the man who was driving that Ford Explorer, the driver agreed to give me a lift. Not to the police station or anything, but to my house. I made it back safely where I couldn't thank the driver enough. I immediately woke up my parents and told them. My dad wanted to know if I got his tag number, and then I felt like punching myself in the face. I failed to get the simplest information from the guy that would have allowed me to actually properly report him. All I knew was that he drove a faded blue '99 Ford Explorer. I made sure to give Alex a piece of my mind, and part of me always held a grudge against him ever since just for abandoning me at a party without telling me. I haven't seen him in 4 years now, however, and this was actually the first time I even thought about this incident for almost a year now. As time goes on, even the worst of memories may start to fade, but after writing this to share with the internet, it's once again fresh in my mind.
Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you enjoyed. But be sure to keep those lights off and tune into the video that Mr. Nightmare and I have done on my channel about horrific hitchhiking murders. You can either click on screen now or in the description below to watch that video, and be sure to subscribe while you're there, because you won't want to miss what's next.